let's move on and introduce the concepts of benefit, cost, and surplus. Resources are allocated efficiently and in the social interest when they are used in the ways that people value the most highly. This is the same as saying that the marginal benefit of consuming an additional unit is the same as the marginal cost of producing an additional unit. In simpler terms, it's where demand equals supply. The value of consuming an additional unit of a good is known as the marginal benefit. Think about it as the enjoyment of consuming an additional unit. The price of a good is what we actually pay for it, regardless of how much we value the good. Individual demand refers to the relationship between price and quantity demanded of a good or service by one person. Take the pizza example on the screen. Assume that this is a two-person market for pizza. Every point on the highlighted demand curve represents a price-quantity combination that Lisa would go for. Similarly, the second curve shows the quantities that Nick would demand given the different prices. The market demand represents the combined quantities demanded by both Nick and Lisa, in this example, our entire market, and we get the market demand by adding the quantities demanded at each price. Mathematically speaking, we're taking the horizontal sum of Lisa and Nick's demand curves. As we already know, each individual demand curve can be thought of as a marginal benefit curve, representing how much each individual values an additional unit of a good. The market demand curve can thus be thought of as the marginal social benefit curve, meaning that it represents how much the entire market values an additional unit of the good. Consumer surplus refers to the excess benefit received from a good over the amount paid for it. This means that when people buy something for less than it is worth to them, less than they value it, they gain some amount of surplus. Let's look at our two-person pizza economy again, but this time let's assume that each slice costs $1. Lisa would buy 30 slices in this scenario. If we consider the demand curve to be a marginal benefit curve, we'll notice that the first 29 slices are valued at more than $1 by Lisa. For example, the 10th slice seems to be valued at around $2. So for the 10th slice, Lisa has a surplus of $1 because she values it to be $2 but only pays $1. It's only for the 30th slice that Lisa values it to be the same as the amount that she pays for it. Thus, for the 30th slice, her surplus is $0. To calculate her individual surplus, we need to calculate the area that is under the demand curve but above the price. This is equal to the area of the red triangle on Lisa's graph and can be calculated as a dollar value by using 1/2 multiplied by the base times the height of the triangle, which is the formula for calculating the area of a triangle. I'll skip over calculating Nick's consumer surplus since it is the exact same process. Once we have the market demand curve, we can calculate the total consumer surplus. This can be calculated by either adding all of the individual surpluses, so Nick and Lisa's individual surpluses, or it can be calculated by finding the area under the demand curve and above the price, like we did for Lisa's demand curve. In this case, we can't use the formula for a triangle for the market demand curve since the shape isn't a proper triangle, but we can split the area up into different shapes and find the surpluses that way as well. Let's move on to the supply side of things. Firms make a profit when they receive more from the sale of a good than its production cost. The cost is essentially what a firm gives up to produce, or how much money they have to spend to produce. The price is what the firm receives when it sells that good. The marginal cost is the cost of producing one more unit of a good. When we talk about small changes in production, say 10 or 20 units of a t-shirt in a factory, the marginal cost often stays the same. It's when we want to increase production by maybe 1 million units that we might have to open up a new factory, hire more workers, etc. This is when the marginal cost would change. A producer has to receive at least the marginal cost per unit it produces in order to make a profit. Thus, the firm won't produce unless the price is equal to or greater than the marginal cost. The supply curve can also be split up into individual supply curves and the market supply curve. The individual supply curve represents the relationship between price and quantity supplied by an individual producer. This example is similar to the pizza example for the demand curve, but it's from the perspective of the producer. Again, we're going to assume that we're in a two-producer economy where Mary and Max are the only suppliers of pizza. Just like with the market demand curve, we can take the horizontal sum of the two individual supply curves to get our market supply curve. This is the same as adding the quantities supplied at each price for our individual producers. Just as our demand curve could be seen as a marginal social benefit curve, we can call the market supply curve the marginal social cost curve. This curve represents the cost of producing an additional unit of the good for the market, not an individual supplier. Producer surplus is defined as the excess amount received from the sale of a good or service over the cost of producing it. We're looking at how much money the firm receives by selling the good compared to how much it spends producing the good. In the highlighted graph, we can see that if Maria produces the 50th unit, it would cost her $10 to produce it. However, the market price is $15, so her surplus for the 50th unit would be $5. If Maria produces at her optimal quantity, which is the quantity associated with a $15 price, she would be producing 100 units. To calculate her producer surplus, we would take the area above the supply curve and below the price. And again, this is a simple triangle, so we can use the half base times height formula to calculate the area. If we want to calculate the total producer surplus, we can either take the sum of the individual producer surpluses, or we can calculate the area above the supply curve and below the price. Both will give us the same answer. Again, we can't use the formula for a triangle since the shape looks more like an arrow. We could split it up into two triangles and a rectangle, or any other combination of shapes that would allow us to use simple geometric calculations.